I remember also, just how good the language instruction was at this center. It's called Al Arabiya. The teachers were really some of the best language teachers I've ever had. They're all extremely intelligent. They're very well educated. Most of them had degrees from Darul Uloom departments, and Darul Uloom is where they focus on classical Arabic literature as well as Islamic studies. So they get like a balance of both, and it makes them extremely good at Arabic. Maybe the equivalent would be like if someone did a double major in English and religious studies at an American university, and focused on like maybe Old English or, Chaucer, English or Shakespearean English. It's like, very classical, kind of like difficult texts. And so I did Tajweed, and they had certain books that they had me use for Tajweed. They were very helpful in teaching Tajweed and making, really good diagrams on the board, which I took many photographs of. And going through an actual like Tajweed text was quite nice. It was a sharh of Tuhfat al-Atfal, if I remember correctly. And we went over like excerpts from many classical texts. People like Jahidh, and Imam Ghazali, and Ikhwan al-Safa, which was one I particularly requested because I was doing research on it. Because I'm interested, as a side interest, I have this interest in Andalusian mysticism and the Zahiri madhab within Andalusia. So that's a whole nother story I'm not really going to get into. But yeah, so doing various classical texts, also doing modern conversational Arabic, and like I said before, doing some Ammiya or Egyptian dialect, and the books we used for those are published by American University of Cairo Press, which I found very valuable. But I don't think you can really study those books by yourself. You're probably going to need like a teacher or a native speaker informant to kind of help you with some parts of it. One of the nice things about, my trip to Cairo is, I'm a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and I have Egyptian friends who are also students at my university. And, they go home to visit Egypt, when it's like summer break or winter break or those different things. And there was other students from my university that were studying Arabic in Egypt at the same time. So I was able to meet up, with a lot of my friends from Chicago in Cairo, which kind of messes with your mind a little bit to be halfway around the world and see, someone from back home. It's really kind of an interesting phenomena. And yeah, so we all got together. We had a dinner together one time. So that was pretty interesting and fun stuff, and it made the experience a little bit less anxious, I guess you would say, because being in a foreign country without people you're familiar with, and you're speaking an entirely different language, and everything's new, and you have to learn how to survive. There's a little bit of anxiety with that. Another thing that I really liked about Egypt was the cafes. Egyptian cafes are usually like halfway on the street. Like they sprawl out of the building onto the street, and it's just like an open building, there's no walls, and they play sports on the TV, usually soccer, and it's a place people just kind of hang out when they're winding down for the day. And they smoke hookah, they drink tea and coffee, and some of them have like food and snacks and stuff. And people would rather do that than sit at home. It seems like Egypt's much more social culture than American culture. So I'd go there and sit sometimes because it'd be right next to my house, like less than a block away. So I'd just walk over there sometimes and check it out just for the cultural experience. And I got to watch the World Cup, I think it's called, for soccer. I don't really know much about sports, but I remember Croatia was one of the teams playing, and so I got to watch that, and it's kind of, I'm always fascinated how excited people can get over sports, and watching people cheer and all that kind of stuff. And but I mean, Egyptian TV is kind of wild. It's definitely different. Yeah, I remember watching quite a lot of different stuff on Egyptian TV. You know, you'd have like Islamic preachers, you'd have Bollywood, just Quran playing, you'd have like Saudi type stuff, you'd have movies, live stream of the Kaaba where people are making pilgrimage in Mecca. You'd have Sunni channels, Shia channels, you know, all different kinds of stuff. I was actually surprised how many channels there were. There was even what looked like some sort of yoga or martial arts channel. So yeah, there was definitely a lot going on the TV, and sometimes I'd watch it just to kind of improve my Arabic, but not that much. I'm not really much of a TV watcher. One thing obviously that's pretty amazing about Egypt is, well, the Nile River. And the Nile River just goes straight through, you know, the heart of the city. And it's you know, quite big. Of course, during this time, I guess, is the low, when the river is like the lowest. You know, it gets much bigger and, you know, much more aggressive, you'd say. But it's very beautiful. And it, like I said, because it goes right through the heart of the city, there's always bridges, you know, going over it, and you're always driving over it. You know, when you're in taxi cabs and different stuff, it's just a constant part of the city. If there was no Nile River, there'd probably be no humidity at all, and it would be extremely dry. Like, definitely, you're in a desert. Like, so the Nile River is really, I don't know, just cool to be around. There was restaurants on the side of the river. You know, you could go there and get like tea or food and sit literally right on the edge of the river. Like they built them so that these restaurants sit on top of the water, basically. And you'd see all these tourist boats with fancy lights going up and down the river constantly. So that was definitely pretty cool. One thing that I thought was kind of funny about Egypt was American restaurants in Egypt, or like American products in American stores, and how they were very different than in the United States. So like fast food places like McDonald's and Burger King and things like that, which in America is considered like very cheap and dirty food and unhealthy food, was very fancy in Egypt and was a proper sit-down restaurant that had like waiters and stuff, and it was very high quality food. And there was like all this stuff on the menu that you could not order here in America. Like you could get a triple fish fillet sandwich if you wanted. And they, you know, surprisingly had a lot of Radio Shacks in Egypt, which I thought they all went out of business in America. So, yeah, that was kind of different. A lot of like products that were imported from America, like I remember like Lay's chips would be like around $5-6 American dollars, where you could get the Egyptian brand Shibs for less than $1. But there's this like high-end grocery store called Alpha Market that had a lot of American products, and so I think I went there once just to try to find gluten-free stuff, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm allergic to gluten. And yeah, I was quite surprised how much American stuff they had. They even had like Halloween doormats, which kind of surprised me a lot. And everything was very expensive because it was imported. So you're basically paying like American prices for groceries, maybe slightly more. So I don't think I went there again after that one time, because it was just too expensive. But it was really interesting to see all this American stuff. Like, I think Chili's was like a big restaurant there, but the food was really substandard, if you ask me. I remember I got nachos there once, and it was just like a few chips with a little bit of melted cheese and I think like a little piece of a jalapeno. And when I think of nachos, I think of like having meat and having a lot of chips and lettuce and sour cream and tomatoes and just a bunch more stuff. So it was really strange. It was definitely not what I expected. Let's see. Street animals in Egypt were everywhere. There was cats and dogs that were feral and wild and in the streets pretty much everywhere you went. I mean, it's like a fact of life. They're just always like in the background. They're just always there. And they're everywhere, and you kind of have to be careful because they might have parasites or carry diseases and different things. But at the same time, as a tourist, it was kind of really interesting to see that, because that, of course, doesn't really exist in America, not to the extent it doesn't in Egypt. And then also, like Egyptian dogs and Egyptian cats just look quite a bit different, so it was all pretty interesting. But I remember every night when I was like trying to sleep, you'd hear cats like fighting at night. That was just kind of a constant sound in the background. One thing that was that made the trip really easy was that Uber was pretty much ubiquitous in Egypt. You could take an Uber anywhere you wanted, any time of the day or night you wanted, and they were really cheap too. You'd go like anywhere in the city for like $1 to $3, and they even had it where you could rent a scooter and you'd ride on the scooter with like a rider. So someone would drive you around on like a scooter, like a moped. Or you could do a car, and they even had fancy cars like Mitsubishi Lancers, and it was just, it made the trip really easy, because if you're in a regular taxi, they usually don't have meters and you have to negotiate the price, and as a foreigner you don't really know the price, and they usually cheat you out of a lot of money. So, I didn't really like taking the actual taxis. I much preferred the Uber because it was always a set price, and they were better drivers and they were more courteous. Like, they didn't smoke in the car. The taxi drivers would smoke in the car a lot, different things like that. So but it made it easy to visit different sites around the city. I could go anywhere I wanted with ease, as long as you had a phone with data, which I did. It wasn't fast data, but it was good enough. One of the highlights of the trip for me was going to Souk al-Azbakiya, or the Azbakiya market. And me and some other students, we went there specifically to buy Arabic books. And I mean, this place was like a brawling, sprawling, old-fashioned kind of market, right? So I mean, it was just super crowded. And of course, they sell way more things than just books. They have clothes and all different sorts of things. But me specifically, I was looking for classical Hanafi texts, especially large commentaries or fatawa collections, like responsa collections and different things like that, which I didn't really find too much of, but I did find a lot of other books, classical Arabic books that were very interesting. And they were really cheap. Like, you could get a book for like literally $1 or even less than $1, which surprised me quite a bit. And what surprised me even more than that was the Arabic selection was actually pretty small. And most of the books they had were in Western languages like English and French and German. So yeah, that kind of shows you just how far like colonization and you know, international economics or globalization just kind of reaches the world. But you could tell, you know, this place was a really old marketplace. You know, it had a lot of history. I wish I knew more about the history of the market, but it was definitely a very old place. And I remember, you know, after we did our book shopping, we got like freshly squeezed orange juice, which I have a video of. I'll show you here. And after we got our orange juice and we had bought all the things we wanted to buy, we were waiting for our Uber at like one of the main roads, and saw something pretty traumatic. I saw someone get hit by a car, and I saw their leg basically snap in half. I mean, it was a very loud sound because, you know, it's a huge leg bone that broke. Sorry if I'm getting too graphic, but it was pretty traumatic. And it happened like right as I was kind of getting into the Uber car, and someone had already called an ambulance and all that. I wasn't just abandoning someone. It was kind of like across on the other side of the road from me, and, you know, like I said, it's a very crowded place, so I mean, people were there immediately helping and calling an ambulance and all this and that, but it was still kind of traumatic to witness. So that was a unforgettable moment. And I can remember the noise too, you know, waiting for that Uber car. There was this speaker that played a recording on loop, and it was just a pile of all these flip-flop shoes or sandals, and this recording would say, I think it was like shib ashara, like flip-flops, you know, 10 pounds. And you know, it was a speaker with a recording on loop. So I guess that's how they would announce their product. And I guess the old days they probably would be, you know, yelling it out loud all day long. So it definitely has this like old feel, like it takes you back in time almost to like the medieval era. You know, there's so much of this culture is preserved. It's really kind of a beautiful thing in that sense. But yeah, I mean, that's Egypt, I guess, in a nutshell, kind of seeing all that stuff all at one time. And, you know, of course, everything in this traditional market, you have to negotiate. It's all haggling and bartering. There's no set prices. So as a foreigner, you really don't know how much things cost at all. And you're just trying to bargain as low as you can. But, you know, I know that I'm a foreigner. I'm a Westerner who's going there with privilege. You know, when you convert the dollar over to the guinea, I look extremely rich to them. I am richer than them, I guess. And so, you know, I was happy to pay extra than probably what the price was, because, well, I feel like I'm using my privilege to give back in some way, if that makes sense. But if, you know, I wanted to go somewhere that had set prices, where there was no negotiation, like what I'm used to in America, I would go to this, I guess you'd call it a department store called Tahrir Square. And I guess this is kind of like the Walmart of Egypt, Tahrir Square. They have clothing, they have things like household items. I remember I bought a suitcase from there. I bought a lot of clothing from there, you know, like the galabiya, the Egyptian robe, and the pajama pants that go underneath. I bought ties from there because they were like $3 American, which was like super, super cheap compared to buying a tie here in America. But yeah, I mean, in Egypt it's so dang hot and so sunny. Like wearing the galabiya and the ta'ayya, like the traditional kind of clothing, actually helps a lot with the heat. Because I came there with like totally the wrong clothes. I basically had dress clothes thinking that was like international attire, but it was just way too hot and nobody really wears that stuff there, so I really kind of stood out. So, you know, one of the first things I wanted to do was get some traditional, you know, Egyptian clothing, basically. Once I had, you know, clothing, the problem was washing clothes. Washing clothes in Egypt is a very different experience. Nobody in the apartment really knew how to use the washing machine at all, and it didn't have any clear instructions with it at all, and it was probably a million times more complicated than in America. And none of us really had no idea how to work the machine. It had just like letters on it of the alphabet, like A, B, C, D, and we had no idea what none of them did. So we would just guess and hope it worked and keep guessing until it washed our clothes. And sometimes it'd wash your clothes, but it wouldn't drain out the water, and you'd have to figure out which setting drains the water. And so yeah, it took us a long time to like figure it out, and I don't think we ever really did. And then once you do that, you know, there's no dryer. You hang dry your clothes. Either you have a drying rack inside the apartment that you can hang clothes on, or you're hanging it off a clothing line off your balcony and drying it. And then in the Egyptian heat, you know, your clothes dry really fast. But on, I think, all the buildings in Egypt, you have people who live on the roof. And that's usually the people who have less money. It's cheaper rent to live on top of the roof in like a shanty house. And I don't think they have proper plumbing because they were dumping buckets of urine and feces off the side of the building, and sometimes it would hit your clothes that were hanging on your balcony. So sometimes after I had just washed and dried my clothes, I'd go take them off the balcony and they'd have feces on them and urine, and I'd have to go wash them again. So that was definitely a different experience than you know, living in America. But overall, you know, don't get me wrong, I loved Egypt. Egypt was probably one of the best experiences in my entire life, and I was much more happy there. I really enjoyed things there. But yeah, it's a different lifestyle for sure, and it takes some you know, adjusting to, and it takes a lot of open-mindedness to kind of get used to it all. But it's fun. It's a journey. It's an adventure. And, you know, as an American, I have that privilege to go there, be a tourist, and do all that, and have that kind of adventure, and not, you know, bear any of the consequences that a lot of normal people there who live there, you know, have to endure. Probably one of my most vivid memories about Egypt was an experience I had at Azhar, the Azhar Mosque. And it's a long story, but it started out, there was one of my colleagues from the University of Chicago who was studying Arabic in Alexandria, Egypt, at the same time that I was in Egypt. And my colleague came to Cairo, and my colleague's parent was also traveling and came down. So they were both in Cairo, and I had been staying in Cairo already, so I offered to give them like a tour of the area and they wanted to see Azhar. So I said, oh yeah, I've been down there already quite a bit. So I offered to give them a tour. And that day when I was with them, I had a pretty, I guess you'd say, spiritual experience at the Azhar Mosque. And so went to the mosque for the noon prayer, dhuhr. And it's a very beautiful mosque. It has this amazing courtyard with beautiful flooring. There's all these classes going on in different sections of the mosque. And we went there for dhuhr, and we prayed Salat al-Dhuhr. And afterwards, the Imam recited some Quran, which I was able to film with my phone. Having kind of felt, I guess you'd say, like a spiritual high kind of from the Quran, somebody came up to the front row and handed the imam an item that was wrapped in a white shroud or blanket, or kind of looked like it might be a tablecloth or something, just like some white blanket. And I was thinking, oh, someone's probably like giving the imam a gift or something. And then the imam sets this item like more or less kind of in front of me, pretty dang close to me, maybe 5 feet away from me. And he stands up and he says, we're going to pray the funeral prayer for this baby. So it was a dead baby that was wrapped up in a burial shroud that was about 5 feet in front of me. And as soon as he said that, as soon as I stood up, I just started crying. Profusely crying, like my body was shaking. I was crying so hard. And I cried like that through the entire prayer, and even afterwards doing a nafila prayer. And I was pretty kind of emotionally traumatized. It kind of makes you think about the finite aspect of life and how anybody can die at any moment, and how we often take our lives for granted, especially the way we live our lives. And that was a pretty intense experience for me. And I slowly kind of, made my way out of the musalla, the prayer area, towards the courtyard. And I'm standing just outside the prayer area in the courtyard with another American person that I was, traveling with that day, as I mentioned earlier. And so here's us, two Americans, standing in the courtyard, and I assume I looked pretty emotional. And I look across the courtyard, and there's what obviously looks like some huge Islamic scholar with an entourage of about 30 people staring right at me and walking towards me in a very intentful manner. And he's a very, very old man. If I had to guess, I would say in the 90s, 80s or 90s. And he walks right up to me and starts talking to me. And, of course in Arabic, and asking me questions like, oh, where are you from? What are you doing in Egypt? I said, I'm from America. I came here to study Arabic. Oh, where are you studying Arabic? Of course, this is a very, very old man. And so when he spoke, it was difficult to understand him. And sometimes one of his students or one of the people in his entourage would repeat what he said in very clear Arabic so that I could understand. Because, this old man had kind of a faint, voice. And, he had this very deep spiritual presence, like an aura that just oozed from him of spirituality. Like, you'd think this man was clearly a saint. And so I'm having this conversation with him. I'm saying, I'm studying at this Mosques in Muhandisin. And we're making more or less like small talk, but he had like a genuine concern and love for you that you just felt. Like he wasn't just having idle talk. He was really trying to have, an experience with you and really wanted to take care of you in a spiritual manner. And this is something I'll never forget. And then, before you know it, he just, the conversation was over, and him and his entourage, walked away. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly where they went. I was just kind of in awe and shock by this whole experience. And I find out later that this was a very famous scholar whom I've heard of before, Hassan al-Shafi'i, Sheikh Hassan al-Shafi'i. He's a very famous Muslim theologian, mutakallim, and he wrote a very famous book. I think it's called Al-Madkhal ila Ilm al-Kalam. And, it's like an introductory book on Islamic theology. And, so that was a pretty intense experience. And I remember after that, going to a store called Auf. And this is a very famous store where all the Azhari scholars and shuyukh and students buy traditional clothing. So I remember I went there and I bought some traditional Egyptian-style galabiya, which you can't really get in America. Most of the ones in America that Muslims buy are imported from Saudi Arabia. And so these were something that would be a really unique souvenir to bring back. And also there was quite practical and useful while I was there in Egypt, because it was just so hot. And these clothes were much better suited for the climate. And the Egyptian cotton was admittedly quite nice to wear, much better than any cotton you can get in America. And then after that, we spent the whole entire day going around Khan al-Khalili market, Maidan Imam Hussein, this square that they have where there's a masjid or a mosque called the Masjid Imam Hussein, where it's allegedly has the head of Hussein, which is one of the grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad, and it's buried there. There's a shrine there, lots of people visiting the shrine, and especially there was Ismaili Shias, or Seveners that they're sometimes called, that were there. And as you know, the Sevener Shia, or the Ismailiya, ruled over Egypt for almost 200 years in what's called the Fatimid Dynasty. And I've done research on the Fatimid Dynasty, and I've written a paper on one of their early legal figures called Qadi al-Nu'man. So, I knew some of this history that I was looking at, some of these very old mosques and different things. And, we stopped at this masjid, or not this masjid, but we stopped at this restaurant, Mat'am, that I stopped there only because the name of it was Abu Hamza, so it has my name in it. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I at least had to get like tea or something there. And one thing that was quite jarring that happened while I was at this restaurant is a young girl who I swear couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old came up to us people who were sitting at this restaurant and was begging for money, and was very dirty, wearing very old torn clothes. And it was kind of it was a sad sight. And then the waiter at the restaurant had shooed away this poor child and called her Bint Sharmuta, which is a very, very horrible swear word that I'm not going to translate, and made me so upset that I just left. I just wanted to leave. Once I saw that, I was done. And I went into Khan al-Khalili, which is a very touristy place that has a ton of different souvenirs, but it's a very, obviously, like old market with extremely old medieval architecture and buildings. I mean, it's clearly a very old market that's been around for a long time, in a very old place. And I was very surprised at one of the stores there, which sold antiques, specialized in antiques, had blackface paraphernalia, which is obviously extremely racist. And I just could not believe that such an evil, insidious part of Western culture ended up in Egypt. And it just made me sick to my stomach. So that was definitely a weird experience. And I don't even still know how to process that or what to make of that. But it's just crazy. And one of the cool places that I visited in Egypt was called Hadiqat al-Azhar, or in standard Arabic, Hadiqat al-Azhar, which is Azhar Park. And you have to pay to get in, and I think as foreigners you pay extra. And it's a place where I guess Egyptians go to relax and have fun. Especially a lot of newlyweds were there taking pictures. People like to go there to take pictures because it's a very beautiful place with palm trees and lots of vegetation. There's restaurants in there. We stopped at a restaurant and got food. There's like an artificial man-made lake that was there. Lots of date palms. I mean, it's a very cool place. It's like perched up high on, like, I guess you'd say a hill or a mountain, so you can see a lot of the city. There's like parks there for families, like children to play at. A lot of people there having picnics. A lot of people on dates. A lot of families there just having leisurely, wholesome fun. Very interesting place, to say the least. But I really love the view and looking out, into the cityscape. It's a very, very visceral experience. And you could see the smog, like you could see the clouds and the pollution in the air. I remember you could see the pyramids from a distance too. It was, very, very, very fun experience. Another fun experience that I remember having in Cairo was a Yemeni coffee shop that I went to. So one of my teachers was part Yemeni and part Egyptian, if I remember correctly. And my teacher recommended to me this Yemeni coffee store to go to get like artisan coffee and artisan tea. And of course, Yemenis are quite famous for the Shai Adani tea, which I bought some of that. And they're quite famous for their coffee. And my mom especially was asking me to bring her back coffee from Egypt. And so I went there, and that was like a really fun store. Of course, a really different way to buy stuff. You go to the cash register, you tell them what items you want, how much you want. They sell stuff by the pound or by like these boxes or canisters. And then you get a piece of paper that says you paid for the such and such item. You bring it up to another counter, and they like prepare it for you. So it was different. It was a little bit confusing how to navigate it at first, being a foreigner. But that was like a really cool place that I got to go to. And of course, the coffee and tea from there was really good. And you could just smell all the different spices that they used, that they put with the coffee. I mean, it was just really one of the more memorable experiences I had there. And another place that I visited was the American University of Cairo. I believe it's called Al-Jami'a Al-Amrikiya Bil-Qahira, which is the old campus is located on Tahrir Square, right across the street from the infamous bureaucratic Mugamma. If you don't know what the Mugamma is, I recommend you watch an Egyptian movie, which is subtitled in English. Terrorism and Kebab, Al-Irhab wal-Kebab, which is a very famous, I believe it's a 90s movie, maybe 80s. It's like a comedy movie, Egyptian comedy, with the very famous Adil al-Imam, a famous actor there in Egypt. But anyways, the American University of Cairo had a really cool English language bookstore that's all academic literature. So for me, that was quite fascinating, being an academic. And they also had a lot of books to learn Arabic there, which I took quite a lot of advantage of. And I bought a dictionary on, that was English to Egyptian dialect. I bought books to learn the Egyptian dialect. I bought some dictionaries for standard classical Arabic, and I bought some academic literature there as well. So I think I went there more than once, probably like 2-3 times, because I enjoyed it so much there, and I enjoyed being at Tahrir Square. I enjoyed downtown, Cairo. One of the places I liked going to was Meydan Talat Harb, and the restaurants and stores down there. Very high end place with a lot of fancy stores. I was very surprised there was a lingerie store there. I was very surprised that there's just like stores to buy suits and dress clothes like everywhere. Lots of restaurants. Very upscale and fancy, and Western architecture. And I kept thinking about this word that's always thrown around in the media of third world country, developing country. And the longer and longer, the more time I spent in Egypt, the more I just realized these are racist, imperialist, hegemonic words that are meant to discriminate and downplay Egypt and Egyptians and many other countries as countries. It's meant to completely be derogatory, and it's just propaganda. And there was nothing that I couldn't get in Cairo that I could get in America. All the same stuff I could get in America, I could get in Egypt too. As long as you got the money, you can get whatever you want. I felt like I could get more stuff in Egypt than I could in America. And there was electricity, there was internet, there was data. I just did not understand how people could say third world country or developing country or so on and so forth. It seemed pretty developed to me. As far as the pyramids go, I only cared really to see the pyramids from a distance. I had heard a lot of bad stories about how they rip off tourists there, and how the police there expect bribes, and how they expect you to pay tons of money to see different parts of the pyramid. You have to pay money to go inside the pyramid. Then they're going to ask you for more money to go deeper into the chambers and different stuff. And for me, it just I wasn't that into it. I wasn't there to see touristy stuff. I was there to get more of an authentic experience of Egypt. And I'm a historian of Islamic intellectual history, and I was much more interested in seeing the historical sites after the 7th century. I'm not so interested in the ancient history of Egypt per se. So for me, I went and seen a lot of the early medieval mosques that were there, and architecture, and all these different things. And one of the places that I saw was Masjid Amr bin al-As, which was arguably the first mosque ever built in Egypt, for sure in Cairo. And Amr bin al-As radiyallahu an is a direct disciple or companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you're talking about one of the direct companions of the Prophet who went into Egypt and built a mosque. So it's an extremely, I guess you would say, important spiritual site for Muslims, and it's a very early mosque in Islamic history. So seeing the architecture of it was really interesting, and it was set up very different than many other mosques. It had a lot of multiple mihrab, or prayer niches, mihrabs, that were spread out throughout the mosque. Of course, they all faced the same direction. It had a courtyard. It had in the courtyard was a place to make the wudu, the ablution, the ritual washing. So it was really, really interesting place, and I loved being there. So I went there multiple times. It was one of my favorite places in Cairo to go to. And every time I went there, I saw familiar faces too. And one of the places also that I went to that I thoroughly enjoyed was the Cairo Citadel. You have to pay to get in, and of course they charge you more being a foreigner. But it was very, very kind of interesting place. It's known for, they call it Qala'a Salahuddin. So apparently it's named after Saladin, who basically was the one who ended the Fatimid Empire that I mentioned earlier, and started what was called the Ayyubid dynasty, because his name was Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And so this Qala'a Salahuddin, they call it the Cairo Citadel. It had famously a mosque there called, I believe it was Masjid Muhammad Ali Basha. And Muhammad Ali Basha, he was one of the rulers, a sultan over Egypt in the 1800s during the time of the Ottoman Empire. And he built this mosque in, modeled after Ottoman architecture and Ottoman mosques. And so it was basically a replica of Ottoman mosques. And, so it's pretty small because it's, I guess, intended to be a replica. It's not intended to be a full-size giant mosque like the giant, huge mosques that they have in Istanbul or in other places in the Muslim world. But it was still quite an amazing sight. It wasn't an official prayer time, but I definitely prayed what are called nawafil prayers, or like extra credit prayers in there. And there was like tour groups going on. There's like Egyptians speaking all different kinds of languages, like Italian and German, and all different kinds of stuff was going on in there. So it was a very beautiful place, very interesting place. And then after we had descended from that mosque, there was another mosque adjacent to it that definitely was not well taken care of, not compared to Masjid Muhammad Ali Basha. It looked very derelict, which surprised me because the sign outside said that it was a Mamluk mosque. So after the Ayyubid dynasty, there was the Mamluk Dynasty. And the Mamluk Dynasty were slaves who had basically taken over the government and become the rulers of Egypt. And these were foreign slaves that were Mongolian in descent and imported from what I guess would be modern day Russia into Egypt, and they eventually took over the country. And so this was built during the Mamluk Dynasty, and it was called Masjid Qalawun, or Qalawun, and that's one of the Mamluk rulers. But still, I was very surprised that this what appeared to be a 13th century mosque was in very derelict shape, which made me very, very sad, because I enjoyed this mosque much more than the previous one from Muhammad Ali Basha. And it was very quaint. They could only have carpet on a small section of the mosque because it was very derelict. Most of it did not have carpet. A lot of it was falling apart. But still, it was a beautiful, beautiful building of architecture. And just as we were about to leave, the muezzin, or caller to prayer, starts calling prayer for the Azhar Salah, the afternoon prayer. And so I'm like, are they really praying here? I was kind of surprised because it looked, pretty derelict. But yeah, they really did. And the muezzin, he gave the adhan, which I have a video of. After the adhan, I started talking to the muezzin, and explained to him like, oh, like I'm a tourist from America. I'm here studying Arabic. And we got talking about different subjects, and I mentioned how I went to an Islamic university, and I'm doing my master's degree in like Islamic history. And once he found that stuff out, then he made me lead the prayer. So I was obligated. I capitulated to his insistent attitude with me, and I ended up leading the prayer, which was a very spiritual experience for me that I enjoyed quite a bit. And yeah, that was probably one of the coolest experiences I had there in Egypt. And that was basically my experience in the Cairo Citadel. And I'm gonna probably end with a not so pleasant story, so definitely not the last isn't the best part of the story by any means. But one thing that anybody probably knows about if they've ever traveled to Egypt is Antinol. Unfortunately, when you're there in Egypt, you will get sick. It's going to happen. And, Antinol's a good antibiotic. And I had to take it 2 different times where I got very, very sick with food poisoning. But the one thing that was very cool about Egypt was that healthcare there was very cheap. And I was able to get medical treatments that I could not get in America for free or extremely cheap in Egypt. So I was able to get medicine I could not get in America for some conditions I have, and all the pharmacists there are educated and speak English, and you can pretty much buy anything you want at the pharmacy. You don't need prescriptions. They don't have that type of system. So I remember I bought a bunch of different kinds of medicines and brought them back to America, so that was kind of interesting too. But overall, Egypt was probably one of the best experiences or moments of my entire life, and I just hope to be able to travel internationally much more in the future. And I really wish I could have stayed in Egypt much longer, but of course I have to come back. I have obligations at home, and have things to attend to and family to attend to, and have school that starts up again in the fall, so had to go back. And the trip back was very difficult, more difficult than the trip going to Egypt. Leaving was a much harder experience and much more, I would say, confusing. I remember when I got to the Egyptian airport, the Cairo International Airport, and got my ticket and all this and got through security, they basically wanted a bribe for me, a $200 bribe, in order for me to check all my bags. And that was literally all the money I had left in my bank account. And that was supposed to get me through, the next couple months until school really started. Like, I needed that to pay bills back home in America, pay for my electricity and different things. So that was pretty brutal, and it took me a long time. I think I was probably the last person of my group or my flight to get through the ticketing process and the security and all this and that. And I went to where my gate was supposed to be, and it wasn't a gate. It was just like electronic automatic doors that open up like at a supermarket that just go to the tarmac of the airport. And they made us just get on a bus, and this bus drove us way down this runway to like a small tiny airplane. And it had stairs that go up to the airplane, and it's just chaos. Everyone just bunches together, bottlenecks at the stairs, no organization, no nothing. And then when you get to the top of the stairs, when you're about to enter the aircraft, they have like ad hoc security. So they just literally like unzip your bag and look in it, I guess make sure there's nothing dangerous in there, and then send you on your way. So that was like a totally weird experience for me, that I wasn't really sure what was going on most of the time. And then the flight was pretty easy. I flew to Amman, Jordan, and when I got to Amman, Jordan, I had to go through a whole nother security process for the flights to America. I had to do the full body scan and go through the whole security hoopla all over again. And I remember, I was much better able to understand the Arabic they were speaking in Amman when I was leaving, because I had studied Egyptian dialect, and so the Jordanian dialect wasn't all that different. I mean, it had some slight differences, but I had already studied a little bit of Shami dialect before, so knowing both Shami and Egyptian, Jordanian dialect is kind of in between those two. And so I was able to easily understand everything that they said, which was really like a moment of joy for me. And then I took a long flight back to America. And again, I was not able to sleep the entire flight, and my back was just killing me after it was over. It was quite arduous, that long flight from Amman to Chicago. But I got through it. And I'll do it all over again. And then coming back to America, I think the first thing I wanted to get was Taco Bell, so that was what I did. Got some burrito or something. I can't even remember what it was anymore. And yeah, that was my story in summation, in a nutshell. And I know this has already been quite a long video, but I wanted to document the whole entire story. And because, I know as I get older, my memory will fade and I won't be able to remember all these things. So for me, it's also a way of just documenting all this stuff for myself, as well as sharing the experience for others. And definitely my Arabic improved much more than anything I've ever done before in my life. Being immersed in the language, going to the country where the language is spoken, speaking it all day, every day, to get your basic needs fulfilled, to go and buy food, to go and buy toilet paper, to go and buy, everyday things. And of course in Egypt you really have to go quite often to the store just to buy water and things like that, so yeah, my Arabic speaking improved quite a bit, and of course my reading of classical Arabic improved way faster and better than any other method I had ever used. So I mean, really, we might pontificate, all these people in the polyglot community here on YouTube, about different methods to learn languages, but honestly, I feel like nothing can replace just being immersed in the culture. There's nothing really can. It really makes a huge difference. It's one thing to try to artificially immerse yourself in your apartment by playing, your language all around you and speaking it all around you and stuff, but you're in America. You don't need to speak it to get your daily needs 24/7. So, it does make a significant difference. And I think being in the culture, being at the location where the language is spoken, there's a lot more connections made in the brain to the language that help you remember the language much more stronger, and you have a lot of visceral memories and experiences that ties you to the language. So I highly recommend doing that for anybody studying any language if you're able to. Try to immerse yourself. And if you're interested in traveling to Egypt specifically, feel free to find my Facebook page and message me, and I'm happy to share tips and talk to you more about it, because I think it's a really good place to go learn Arabic, and it's certainly one of the cheapest too, if that's a factor for you. And I think it's the most culturally richest place to go study Arabic. Probably Egypt and Morocco are pretty good destinations for that. Not that I'm saying other Arab countries are not culturally rich, but I feel like in Egypt especially, you get a really nice immersion experience as a Westerner that maybe is a little bit harder to get in other Arab countries. But I think I'll end the video with that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Wada'an.